I've done many videos on number stations now, including a documentary which I'll link in the description below for those who are new to this phenomenon. I've played you lots of audio clips and given information about who may be sending these strange coded messages, but we've not yet looked into those who may have been receiving them. So in this instalment, I thought we'd look at some first-hand testimony from former spies who received number station broadcasts while undercover. We'll also look at a handful of instances where a court of law has revealed evidence of the reception of number stations in some high-profile spying cases. Former sleeper agent Jack Barsky of the KGB, who spied on the United States from 1978 to 1988, revealed some insight into the somewhat arduous and long-winded process of receiving secret messages from the Soviet Union whilst undercover in the USA. He said communication with the centre was the most awkward and at one point the most annoying part of the whole spying business, because it was labour intensive, it took a lot of time, and the amount of information that could be transmitted back and forth was not enough to really make sense. So I got my instructions through shortwave radio. It was double encrypted Morse code. I got a transmission about once a week, Thursdays at 9:15 p.m. And if you think of maybe half a page of typewritten material, that would take me, to receive and to decrypt, would take me roughly around 2.5 hours. Sometimes I'd spend the whole night into the early morning if there was a very lengthy radiogram. For me to transmit information to the centre was even more awkward because it was via secret writing through the regular mail. It would compose of a letter as if I was writing to somebody, and then on top of the open text I would put a text in secret writing, and then that letter was mailed to what we call a convenience address in, say, South America or in Europe, to a person who was collaborating with the KGB, who would then hand to a local KGB agent. It would then go into the diplomatic pouch, sent to Moscow, and over there it would be developed. So when you think about, was there a conversation possible, you ask a question and you get an answer 3 weeks later, so it was awkward and fundamentally insufficient. Jack Barsky confirmed in another interview that he used iodine-developed one-time pads to decipher his messages. When asked about the content of the messages and the information sent, he claimed that as a spy in the United States, he knew more than the KGB, and he'd often correct their instruction or lead them on a different course. Eberhard Fatkenhauer worked from 1975 to 1978 as an agent for the United States Foreign Intelligence Service, the CIA. After his arrest by the Stasi in 1979, a military court sent him to 13 years in prison. In an interview, he recalled using shortwave radio as a means of communication whilst undercover. He said they had 3 frequencies on the shortwave radio and you had to listen to them on certain hours and days. Then you had to check whether the first number was even or uneven, and, if I remember correctly, the even ones were for me. The numbers were given in groups of 5. It could be 10 of those, or 20, 30, 50, and it went like 3, 4, 8, 7, 5, and so on. All these numbers were repeated at the end so that you could check whether you got them all right. And of course you listened to those wearing a headphone so that no one, like a neighbour, could hear you. And then the work began. You had to add each number to another number. Only you and the operator who sent the message had those numbers. And for example, you added an 8 to a 4, but then you didn't get 12 but 2. This is a so-called incorrect addition. Then you had to look this 2 up in a chart, and I still remember the 2 became an N, and this way also periods, commas, any punctuation mark could be given. This was a complete random pick of numbers. Only you and he who had sent the message knew what it was about. When asked about how often he received messages, Fatkenhauer said, "No, not several and not late in the night, but yeah, about twice a week I listened in. When I was once in Hungary and my girlfriend was a bit surprised when I took my radio and removed myself from her." So, 2 instances where former spies have openly spoke about the use of number stations as part of their activities. Now let's look at some public cases in which evidence of the use of number stations as a means of passing commands has come to light. Firstly, in 1982, Jeffrey Prime, a former GCHQ linguist specialist, made a confession of his activities as a spy. Of the evidence against him, a standout piece was a radio receiver and a Grundig reel-to-reel tape recorder that contained a coded number message in German. There was also a briefcase with a false bottom which contained a list of frequencies and schedules, along with the ID he used to recognize any traffic that was meant for his reception. There was also a number of one-time pads. He was ultimately jailed for 38 years following his plea of guilty. In 1988, Václav Jelinek, a Czech STB spy who operated under the false identity of Erwin van Harlem, was arrested by British Special Branch detectives whilst receiving a number station broadcast on a shortwave radio in his London apartment. When the raid started at 9:15, Jelinek tried to lower his radio's antenna, but it jammed. When he pulled open a drawer and grabbed a kitchen knife, an officer tackled him and yelled, "Enough, it's over, it's over." One-time pads were found on microfilm hidden inside bars of soap. They also found car magazines later found to contain messages written with invisible ink. The pads enabled detectives to decipher some of the received messages, which were later used in court, and Jelinek was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Jelinek has spoken about his use of shortwave radio in an interview on a Dutch radio station in the past as well. In 1998, the so-called Cuban Five from the WASP network spy ring, agents of the Cuban DGI, received instructions via encrypted messages that were sent each day by the Cuban HF number station, Atención.
Atención, 5, 5, 3, 4, 0, 8, 7, 7, 2, 0, 1, 6, 2, 6.
Another instance was the Ana Montes case, a senior US Defense Intelligence Agency analyst spying for Cuba. She was arrested in 2001, and the federal prosecutor stated that Montes communicated with the Cuban intelligence service through encrypted messages and received her instructions through encrypted shortwave transmissions from Cuba. In 2006, Florida International University professor Carlos Alvarez and his wife Elsa Alvarez were charged with espionage and acting as agents for Cuba. The US District Court in Florida stated that defendants would receive assignments via shortwave radio transmissions. These messages were encoded in 5-digit groupings. Once received, defendants would input these coded messages into their home computer, which was equipped with decryption technology contained on a diskette. Based on general information provided by the FBI, Diplomatic Security started a comprehensive internal investigation in 2006 that resulted in the identification of Kendall Myers as a probable Cuban agent. In 2009, the FBI started an undercover operation. The Myers were both retired at the time. An FBI undercover source approached the Myers and told them he was sent by a known Cuban intelligence officer to contact them and get some information. Walter Kendall Myers agreed to meet the undercover source and to provide the requested information. During a series of personal meetings, and believing they were talking to a genuine Cuban intelligence officer, they revealed their 30 years of espionage activities for Cuba and various operational details. Amongst these details were the use of shortwave radios, as well as email communications with their handlers and their own code names. According to the affidavit, the FBI collected enciphered messages that were sent by shortwave broadcasts from the intelligence agency in Cuba to intelligence officers and agents abroad. So there you have it, some concrete evidence of the use of number stations in the world of espionage. Does it go in any way towards helping us to understand the number stations phenomena? Not really. They still transmit daily, following rigid schedules, and are just as impossible for an outsider to decipher today as they were when they started being used over 100 years ago.
Sieben, drei, drei. I,